वीडियो चालू हो गया ये आगे वाले ये आगे ना
Thank you, Dr. Chauhan, for inviting me to be the chairperson of this very fantastic scheme that we are able to be part of. And where I am concerned, my only introduction out here is that I am Dr. Chauhan's student. So, coming back to the basics, I mean, the treatment of diabetes has undergone a sea change over the last couple of decades. We know that from the initial good years of just having a sulfonylurea, metformin and insulin, now we have lots of drugs in the armamentarium, and one of the game changers have been the GLP-1 receptor agonist. And we now look at not the towards the glucocentric approach, but more towards the CRM approach of cardiorenal metabolic protection, along with in the overall management of diabetes, and also things like the MASLD, etc., which have a huge part to play in the pathology of diabetes and its management. And none better than Dr. Mittal sir to talk about it, who is one of the doyens of endocrinology in the country. I know him personally, and that's been my good fortune. Sir is the first DM from AIMS who passed out in the year 87. And I heard at one of his lectures that he has this 10 or 11 year itch in which he keeps on changing institution. From AIMS he went to SGPJ where he was faculty, then he came to Apollo. Again 11 years later sir went to Vedanta where he headed it with flourish, and now he is there with us at Max. So without much ado, I would invite Dr. Mittal sir to do his presentation.
Thank you everybody. Thank you Dr. Chauhan, Dr. Mathur, Dr. Sen Gupta for inviting me here. It's a very informal thing for me. It's just like being at home with friends and spend a nice evening. We talk some science also. So the idea is really to have a nice interaction. I will present some slides and I'll be happy for questions and comments and discussion. And as I said, introductions are really not required here. I think we all know each other. So it's really very nice of you to invite me so many times to this forum. So let me first clarify, I'm really going to talk about GLP-1 RA overall. There will be some focus on Ribelsus because we have more personal experience with Ribelsus. That is correct, and that's the only out of the modern GLP-1 RA, that's the only one available to us, at least officially earlier. But I will sort of tailor this around my recent visits to Boston for the Endocrine Society of the US, where all the recent advances were discussed, and we also presented a paper on Ribelsus, our experience. So I will tailor it around that, but we will move to overall GLP-1 RA and the whole angle about how management of diabetes has actually changed. I mean, the change was first perceptible and palpable by the SGLT2 inhibitors, which really changed the way we choose drugs. But with the increasing efficacy of GLP-1 RAs, the whole scene will change. And you'll see it changing in the next few years. And towards the end, I will summarize what is going to come in this field in the next year, because this is just the beginning, So this whole thing of treating Trinity, meaning the emphasis Trinity doesn't matter, it's actually probably more than a Trinity, it's 4 or more things that we are already targeting. But the fact is that if you're treating just glucose, which is all that we could, we didn't have the tools to do anything else, you're only doing a part of the job, because you will be able to reduce complications that are linked to glucose control. And for other things, you have to use other pills, of course, as much as we can. What happened with GLP-1 receptor agonists, as well as with SGLT2 inhibitors to some extent, is the fact that you suddenly had glucose-lowering agents that did several other things. Now, till 15 years ago, one of my favorite talks was usual talk about type 2 diabetes. What is the dream of an endocrinologist or diabetologist? The dream was to have drugs that produce weight loss and don't produce hypoglycemia. And I remember saying it again and again that these will be the drugs of the future whenever that happens. Now, this is happening all around us. In fact, drugs that do produce hypoglycemia will gradually take a backseat and already are to some extent. So, the fundamental thing about GLP-1 RAs, of course, is the fact that they are drugs that do not just control glucose, they help you lose weight. Along with that, it's not just that. They do several other things, and we will look at those as we go along. So actually, their use in non-diabetic conditions has increased considerably over the last 3 or 4 years, and will go on increasing, I can tell you. Because it turns out that glucose lowering is just one of their actions. We like to say as endocrinologists glucose lowering, and the rest are pleiotropic actions. I don't know if that is correct or not. Glucose lowering is just one of the many actions of these remarkable molecules. So the trinity here, of course, being heart, kidney, and weight. And they're all interconnected. We know that the predominant cause of deaths in patients with type 2 diabetes is heart disease. 65 to 70% people die of heart disease. Predominant cause of death in CKD is also coronary events. Okay? So it's all connected. And the driving force for all of this, including that for type 2 diabetes development, is weight. And it's amazing how our patients don't often understand this. Maybe we don't emphasize it enough, but when you say that I'm fine now, sugars are fine, you say, hey, but you have to lose some weight, otherwise you're not going to get somewhere long-term benefit. So the weight and diabetes, is that connected? Is still a question mark in some people's mind. Whereas we know that in modern times, obesity is the mother of all illnesses, and really that is where it's heading. So if you look at this, this is some images from Indo 2024, the endocrine meeting. We had a work, all of you know that, or some of you know at least, that one of my major interests is calcium and bone disorders. This is from a workshop on this one and this one, on hypoparathyroidism. Someday if someone is interested, there are remarkable developments in changes in the treatment of hypoparathyroidism. It used to be only calcitriol and calcium, but it is changing rapidly. 2-3 years it will be a different kettle of fish. I was in that expert group on hypoparathyroidism. That's one of the things that I was attending. And then we had a case discussion there in Endo 2024. I'm highlighting this because that is one of the suggestions by the sponsor that I should highlight the Endo part of it. So this is the case discussion on osteoporosis. They have a very nice sort of forum where you sit in the middle of the exhibition hall, and it's open, and they have a lovely stage and good audio, and someone presents a case, and then 2 experts discuss the case, and the crowd gathers like a little bit like a mela or a tamasha, and it's a lot of fun. So we had a case discussion there. That's the other thing I was invited for. Then this is our poster on Rybelsus, which was presented by my EMD student Tanvi, who is not here just now, but some of our colleagues are. So that is, and we had another poster on hyper-functioning thyroid nodule turning out to be medullary thyroid carcinoma, which is quite rare. So all those things were happening there. But for you, the gist will be about what happened to GLP-1 RA. And before I do that, again, just to emphasize the team at Max, Saket and Gurgaon and Smart and Panchsheel, these are the endocrinologists there. We have a large team of endocrinologists. There are 6 endocrinologists, including 1 pediatric endocrinologist. There are 3 diabetologists. There are DNB students, 5 fellows, 2. So we have a fairly busy service and department now. I moved to Max almost 5 years ago. Most of you will be surprised. It's almost 5 years because COVID, those 2-3 years, no one remembers or doesn't like to remember. So I've been there almost 5 years. So as someone was saying, Surjit was saying, I think that maybe 5 more years at max. 10 years is my patience level. Okay, so I think this is how we are. So fortunately, we have well-trained people from the best parts, best colleges in India and abroad. So that's just a so there are lots of slides on weight, and so we just remember the following. If we lose weight, we reduce risk of developing diabetes. No confusion. We reduce weight, risk of diabetes goes down drastically. When people with family history ask you, what can I do to protect myself? Keep your weight at an ideal level or as close to ideal as possible. And that's the only way to protect yourself from diabetes. So, number 1 is that. Number 2 is, if you do have diabetes, some of you can go into remission with just weight loss in the early stages. This so-called drama of reversal, you keep seeing these apps and ads, nothing new, nothing big about it. It's been happening for years. Okay? In younger people, overweight, if you lose weight, you get reversal. Third, if you lose weight when you have diabetes, your control becomes better. So independent, if there are 2 people with similar anti-diabetic agents, one person is able to lose weight, the control becomes easier and better. So prevention of diabetes, remission in diabetes, reduction in complication, reduction in improvement in control, and last is reduction in complications. People with diabetes who lose weight have less coronary and other complications. So therefore, the importance of losing weight is not just to protect yourself from developing diabetes, but even if you have developed diabetes, throughout it still remains a laudable goal if you try and lose some weight. So now, of course, we know diabetes we are talking about today, but look at the impact of moderate weight loss, and that is important. You see, if you see a patient who's 30 kg overweight and you tell them you have to lose 30 kg then, how will a guy lose 30 kilograms? That's crazy, isn't it? You can't, that's being very negative. You say you try and lose 5 kilograms. Try and lose 5 kilograms. Let's keep that as a goal for next 3 months. You know, those are the kind of goals, they are realistic goals, otherwise depression and all those things set in all the time. But there is a big benefit. And as you lose more weight, the benefits increase. Look at the number of things that are benefits by 5 to 10% weight loss, 10 to 15% weight loss, and if you go higher than that. So tools that will enable you to help to achieve these targets. That means in addition to lifestyle, whatever else can help you to achieve these targets will improve all these conditions. And I think that's very, very important to remember. Just one slide of the famous direct trial from UK, which actually suggested when they used a weight management program, they found that they were able to induce remission in a very high proportion of people with diabetes. Look at that. Look at how it goes to the right. You lose more than 15 kilogram weight. Look at the remission rates. So there is a direct relationship. Of course, remember this is not, don't oversimplify. In India there are type 2 diabetics who come, there are many types of type 2 diabetes, many clusters. There are many groups of type 2 diabetes which come with insulin deficiency right from the start. Right? So they are not candidates for this. But a huge 60-70% come with just weight as a driving force. So therefore, there it will be a it will play a big role. Worldwide it is said that if one were able to eradicate obesity, then 80 to 90% of type 2 diabetes will disappear. Right? So you just have to remember that this is all real and can be done, but it is not easy. It is not easy to do it with just lifestyle. If you are looking at more than 15 kg weight with lifestyle, these guys are on an 800 calorie diet. Try doing that. You know, so it's not easy. It's not one of those crazy things. So you have to do it under medical supervision with a lot of guidance about nutrition and everything. Anyway, so I will talk briefly about obesity, heart and kidney, plus some other things also towards the end. What are the advances in the area? But very briefly, type 2 diabetes and obesity, heart disease, kidney disease, oversimplification. A slide from Daniel Drucker's latest review. And if you look at what GLP-1 does, it reduces HbA1c. We all know that. it reduces body weight, it reduces the risk of heart failure of preserved ejection fraction, the first actual molecule group to do that. Because there's no medical treatment, drug treatment for heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Reduced risk of MI, stroke, overall, and CKD. So it seems like remarkable, isn't it? But this is the proof, this is where we are heading, this is what is happening, that in patients, when you're looking at all these benefits, single molecule that produces all these benefits, right? But there are adverse effects. A lot of patients get upper GI symptoms. Nausea is quite common. Vomiting in some people, if it's once or twice, you ignore it, but if someone is throwing up frequently, you just throw the drug. You know, you're not going to let your patient suffer and say, नहीं तुम्हारा long term फायदा हो गया, तुम्हारा heart रोज तुम उल्टी करते रहो लेकिन heart तुम्हारा ठीक रहेगा. So that's not okay either, right? So you have to see based on the patient tolerability, right? A very recent study, which actually agrees with our data, is that the discontinuation rates over 6 months are at least 20%. And many of them are linked to GI side effects, some are linked to cost, this, that, whatever. So, some people get diarrhea. Diarrhea can be difficult at times. Usually it's mild and transient. All of these are transient and they pass off as we continue using the drug. Fatigue, yes. Some patients complain of fatigue which is hard to explain. Most of the time I have found fatigue is linked to dehydration. People don't drink enough water or they are not, they're just feeling low. Some people get psychologically upset. Psychologically upset because they're not able to eat the food they used to. So they actually get depressed about it. They just feel tired and don't feel like doing anything. So all those things are there. But look at what semaglutide 2.4, which is not available to us yet officially, although people are accessing it through their own sources, in South Delhi at least. Now this is 2.4 milligram of semaglutide, once a week injection. For all of you who are relatively new to this area, all the GLP-1s are coming as once a week injections, right? Like dulaglutide or Trulicity and others. So all of them are now coming. So semaglutide 2.4, the commercial name is Ozempic or Wegovy. You're aware that it's a blockbuster which has changed the fortunes of the company Novo, although it was already doing very well, Novo, but with this, their economy is as big as the overall economy of Denmark. Okay, so this is what is happening. Why? Why is it so important? We have so many anti-diabetes. It's not the diabetes thing that's making it so popular. Look at the degree of weight loss. Look at the degree of weight loss. Right? If you're looking at weight loss of 15%, that is unheard of. 15 kg, 16 kg, that kind of weight loss with medication was unheard of till semaglutide. Semaglutide was the first drug to cross that barrier and up to 17.4. So you have very significant 17% weight loss means someone who's 100 kilograms loses 17 kilograms. So that was the first drug. Remember always that with semaglutide, this is injectable semaglutide once a week. We are not talking about Rybelsus yet. So the important point is that when you compare people with diabetes versus those without diabetes, people with diabetes lose a little bit less weight. Remember that always. So if the mean weight loss, let's say, is 15% with people without diabetes, maybe it is 12-13% people with diabetes. So वो थोड़ा ध्यान रहना चाहिए patient से बात करते वक्त. It's slightly less than those without diabetes. But what determines the response? Everyone asks, why do we lose weight? There are many reasons. There are reasons, actions on the adipose side, there are actions on the gut motility, we know that. But what is the main action that is determined to be the cause of weight loss? The main action is on the brain. That's very important. GLP-1 are actions everywhere. And the very elegant studies, these are actually old studies in animals and then in humans. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks. They actually show, don't want to confuse you. First is, in human studies, not only did people eat less, but people also had less taste for unhealthy food. Unhealthy meaning deep fried or very carb-rich food. So there was a difference in taste perception, and that is the level of nuance in this. Food cravings just, of course, went down. And this is actually a good point and a bad point. So eating was considered less pleasurable, and my Delhi crowd, Delhi patients, they hate the idea of food is a very important part of life, pleasure of food. So if you say that eating is less pleasurable, they probably hate you forever. So the thing is that sometimes this is a good point because people can lose weight, sometimes people just don't tolerate that. They say we won't take it. So this is how it is. Now the important part is here, that when they looked at responders versus non-responders using labeled GLP-1, they actually found that in responders it reached the brain here, satiety centers. In non-responders it did not. So proving that all those who responded by significant weight loss had GLP-1 reaching the brain, proving that the brain action is the main action responsible for weight loss. So that is sometimes people get confused about that. It has many actions which promote weight loss, but the one action that makes it different from others is the action on the hypothalamus. Okay. What about oral semaglutide? There is a lot of data on oral semaglutide. If you look at the HbA1c, the pioneer group of trials, there is significant lowering of HbA1c depending on the situation, depending on the baseline HbA1c, typically 1 to 1.5%. More like 1.2, 1.4, 1.5% of lowering of HbA1c with oral semaglutide. Now I'm talking about oral. The dramatic weight reduction data was with the injectable. So with the oral, this is where we are. Used in so many situations as compared to as monotherapy versus empagliflozin versus sitagliptin versus liraglutide. So all the longer bars, the deeper bars are semaglutide oral. Right? So it had induced greater A1C reduction and weight loss with, and I'll come to the weight loss, induced greater A1C reduction than all its contemporaries in this oral semaglutide. And of course, body weight reduction was also significantly more than most other, or all other actually competitors. So we are not talking of injectable semaglutide. Even oral semaglutide produced greater weight loss than other equivalent drugs, relatively equivalent drugs. Now, the issue therefore is, you still have to look at the degree of weight loss. The degree of weight loss is not, which is the deepest bar here? Look at it, 4, 4, 5. So that's what it is. So that has to be clear. You're putting 120 kg person on that. The average weight loss will be in this zone. There will be the odd patient who loses 15 kilograms. That's always there. There will be the odd patient who doesn't lose anything at all. But typically 3, 4, 5 kgs. So you have to be clear about that yourself as well as the patient. That this is what we are expecting. Don't tell them that you're going to lose 20 kilograms with oral semaglutide. And the important thing, of course, is that there is a body weight change is sustained over time. I think that's really important because one of the biggest challenges with all weight loss measures is that the weight is not sustained over time. It comes back, but it does sustain in this. And the weight loss, unlike most other measures that it stops in 4, 5, 6 months maximum, does continue for at least a year. And the plateauing of weight loss only starts after a year. Typically, that's what we see. Some people will plateau earlier. So you can push a little bit through that period, right? It's a remarkable anti-diabetic. We were talking about weight loss, but you look at HbA1c reductions, as I said, very significant, adding on to existing therapy, as monotherapy, whichever way you look at the significant reduction in A1C. Right? So, in fact, that's been our experience with oral semaglutide or Rybelsus, that the A1C reductions are very good actually. Achieving of targets of HbA1c like 7%, I'll show you a bit of the data, just a glimpse, has been very significant. Weight loss, we'll show you in the data itself. So important point, oral semaglutide has been shown to be an effective anti-diabetic with lowering of A1C up to 1.5% or so. It has also been shown to be an effective weight loss agent, but the lowering of the weight loss is typically in the zone of 4-5 kilograms. This is different from injectable semaglutide, where the weight loss can be 15%, 15 kilograms, 13 kilograms. That is very unusual with oral semaglutide. We are hoping to get injectable semaglutide by next year. So let's see, that will change the whole perspective. So when we looked at, we have more than 1,000 patients, probably now, I haven't checked recently, maybe close to 1,200 on oral semaglutide. And this is the first 350 odd which we presented in Boston recently. And I just wanted to show you a few things. What is the average weight loss? Here, same, 3.94 kilograms. We have people with diabetes, right? At about 6 months actually, not even 1 or 2 months. So people have to be prepared for that. But look at what is happening to the HbA1c. If you can see that, if the starting A1C is 7.9, the mean A1C at the fourth visit is 6.6. So there is a very significant improvement in HbA1c, which is clinically very relevant. And when we compare it with real world studies, and I'm hoping this gets published soon, it's on for publication, is that our data is remarkably similar. Baseline A1C 8.1, baseline weight 92, baseline A1C less than 7 and 22.8%. And when you look at A1C reduction, again, depending on the visit, 0.5 at first visit, 1 at second visit, and 1.3 by end of recruitment, end of the analysis. So end of study, half the patients were below 7 HbA1c, which I think is pretty impressive. So best clinics in the world don't have more than 40% people achieve A1c below 7. So this is where oral semaglutide stands. We now move back to injectable semaglutide. So oral semaglutide, cardiac data is awaited very soon. The SOUL study will be out next year. So we'll have cardiac outcome data with that. In general, the effects of oral and injectable semaglutide are similar. It's a difference of degrees. The effect seems to be largely dependent on the blood level that you achieve. So it's only a matter of time before that is achievable with oral also. Why am I saying that? There have been recent studies using 25 milligram of oral semaglutide and 50 milligram. So 3, 7, 14, but 25 and 50, good trials showing enhancement of weight loss to 10%, 10 kg or above. Right? So, because even with that, you'll only be achieving still not the highest level as with injectable, but significantly higher levels of semaglutide in the blood. So blood levels is a central action. Sometimes people think injectable से nausea, vomiting कम होगा. वो ऐसे नहीं है. Gastritis नहीं होती. You don't get gastritis. You get problems with reflux and all because of altered motility, altered sensitivity. So it's not gastritis. So injectables actually have slightly more side effects than oral because of the fact that we have higher doses being achieved, higher blood level is being achieved. So this is important to remember that since all trends will be in the same direction, it's a difference of degree between oral and injectable. So when we look at, we won't go into other cardiac studies and all, no scope and no time today, but there is no doubt that effects on CV outcomes are very striking. MACE, MI, stroke, CV deaths. At a very crude level, we say that GLP-1 RAs, and this you have from the LEADER study with liraglutide, shown many years ago, that cardiac events are reduced with GLP-1 RA. It is thought to be an anti-plaque or anti-atherosclerotic effect. Unlike SGLT2 inhibitors, where it seems that the reduction in mortality is largely linked to improvement in heart function or heart failure. So, in some sense, GLP-1 RAs are acting on the ischemia and SGLT2 inhibitors are acting on the pump. So that is the way to approach it. The dominant effect here will not be on the pump. Dominant effect will be on atherosclerosis. Dominant effect with SGLT2 inhibitors will be on the pumping action. Side effects, don't worry. Obviously, patient profile in these studies were, and of course, there were effects on risk factors. So the cardiac study, so you look at risk factors and then you find that A1C lowering, as I said, 1.5, some weight reduction, all that. So this is lots of GLP-1 RAs put together. This is not just semaglutide. This is a clubbing of various GLP-1 RAs. But what happens in those without diabetes? And these are all recent studies. These are studies last couple of years. Semaglutide and cardiovascular outcomes in people with obesity. So obesity is a big risk factor for heart events. What happens if you use semaglutide in people without diabetes but who are overweight, right? And if you look at that very clearly, death from cardiovascular causes, non-fatal MI or non-fatal stroke, typical in MACE that you see, major adverse cardiovascular events, you find a clear difference between those who were receiving injectable semaglutide versus those who were not receiving. Right? Adverse events we've already spoken about. So, in conclusion, in patients with pre-existing cardiovascular disease, once weekly semaglutide, these are pre-existing cardiovascular disease and obesity, and they found a significant reduction in events. Therefore, the drug is cardioprotective independent of its effects on glucose. That is a very, very important conclusion from this study, which is fairly recent. Then the other holy grail has always been heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. And some of you will know more about this than I do. I'm not an expert in cardiology. But the fact is that preserved ejection fraction has always been a bit of a challenge because lack of drugs that really work for that. Now this is again patients with heart failure and preserved ejection fraction, overweight patients. Okay? And if you look at the change in body weight, again injectable semaglutide, and you see here, very significant drop in body weight. And the quality of life questionnaires. Clearly, people with preserved ejection fraction, heart failure had significant improvement in quality of life scores, significant improvement in symptoms when they were put on GLP-1 RA, in this case semaglutide. So I think this is quite important to understand. Now, there is the whole thing about reduced ejection fraction. There is something that I have been speaking about, and there are studies from Spain which are not so exciting about reduced ejection fraction and GLP-1 RA. And there are some studies on liraglutide, small studies, these are still small studies, but which do show that with reduced ejection fraction we don't know if there is any benefit or not. And that's, I think, important to keep in mind that it's not all the same. We are not treating all heart failure with GLP-1 RA. You may be certainly benefiting preserved ejection fraction, but you may or may not be benefiting reduced ejection fraction. Some studies actually, it's very small, study show an adverse impact on people with heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. Not enough to change management practice, but that has become, even now there was an editorial in Journal of American College of Cardiology, there's a question mark there. It's a question mark there. So this is an extreme view, but I'm sharing it because we should know all viewpoints. We are not politicians, we like to know viewpoints. It's not that what we know is right, there's only one way or the highway. So the thing is that there is type 2 diabetes without heart failure, we know very well. Heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, yes, they certainly help, they will reduce atherosclerotic events, and they certainly improve quality of life. But heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, still an open question. Right? What about the latest data, 2024 kidney, the famous FLOW study, where they looked at patients with chronic kidney disease and type 2 diabetes. There's a higher proportion of those who had significant kidney involvement. So again, we won't take into the details. Indian patients were there part of the study. But once a week, 1 milligram, that was 2.4, remember? 1 milligram itself, 24% risk reduction in composite outcome. Kidney disease progression, CV death, and kidney death in people with CKD and type 2 diabetes. So you're actually seeing improvement in renal outcomes and renal patients, even when cardiac outcomes are involved. So quite clearly, very impressive. So we have clear data on coronary events in people with diabetes and without diabetes. We have data on improvement in quality of life in heart failure. We have data in people without diabetes and reduction of coronary events. So I think these are very, very important points. And we have data on improved outcomes in patients with chronic kidney disease, which is the USP of SGLT2 inhibitors so far. But clearly this study will add GLP-1 agonist. Right? So that I think is an important point to remember. Again, I don't want to bore you with all the details. Progression of kidney disease as well as reduction in coronary events in patients with CKD, both combine to reduce mortality and morbidity. Right? So many ways they analyzed in every way, it showed same 20%, So, the summary of the FLOW study was 24% lower risk of the composite outcome, consistent risk reductions for renal kidney disease components, and depends on pre-specified participant groups, subgroups. I'm not taking you into that, but the benefits stayed across all subgroups. So now, therefore, coming to what is really new after this. These three we've understood, right? We've understood weight, we've understood cardiac, we've understood kidney. We all know about glucose anyway. So you have benefits some of these. Obesity, cardiovascular, renal, right? What more? Look at MASLD, as NAFLD is now called, metabolic associated steatotic liver disease, showing significant benefits. But at the moment, no conclusive data on fibrosis reduction, which is still being studied, but no worsening of fibrosis and significant reduction in liver fat. That seems to be disproportionate as compared to just weight reduction. One can say, the weight come around the fat, which is true, but there is more, there is something more there. The receptors are there, and therefore there is a lot of interesting work in this area. We actually published 3 or 4 years ago the impact of liraglutide on NAFLD in diabetology, which showed very clearly benefits. But there are more and more advanced studies, and the benefits with semaglutide are greater than any other GLP-1 so far. So look at NASH resolution. Here, look at this to the right. Semaglutide increased NASH resolution without worsening of fibrosis. So pre-fibrosis for sure it helps, but very likely it has an impact on fibrosis also. But that time will tell as we get more study. So if we were to summarize before moving to the last few slides, GLP-1 medicines, as Dan Drucker says, type 2 diabetes, in the middle cardiovascular disorders, obesity, that we spoke about. Established benefit in kidney disease, reserved ejection fraction and stroke. To the left, the yellow box is investigation. Metabolic liver disease, very likely. Amazing studies on Alzheimer's disease and even Parkinson's now. Alzheimer's showing clear benefit because you can see the brain action is obviously important. And even peripheral vascular disease, there is some data on that. But the most exciting worldwide right now is the impact on Alzheimer's, because again there are very few drugs that really help that. So if that turns out to be true, then that will be fantastic. So this is the whole spectrum, evolving spectrum of GLP-1. We already discussed the side effects. The other side effect you may have read about, proposed side effect, is the risk of non-arteritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy. This is a data analysis, this is not a prospective study. And they found a higher incidence of this eye condition. It completely seemed, it seemed a bit much to me. Basically, nobody has seen this, no trial has reported this, and in clinical practice people haven't seen this. But in this study they found that there is some correlation between use of semaglutide and this eye complication, which time will tell us if it's true or not. But at the moment it's not changed practice in any way. It's not something that we would, well, fortunately most of our patients are with diabetes and they have a check anyway. But you know, I don't know if the protocol long term will say that you need to do a retina check before you start the medicine. I don't know. At the moment, no, but this is still, we cannot ignore any flag. So we should be, aware that this is also being reported. There are very exciting things on the horizon. Combining cagrilintide with semaglutide. Different modes of action. And this is an amylin, actually the amylin pathway. And you find that there is a, when you combine them, there is a dramatic weight loss. So that's another area which is not very far from reality. This molecule or combination, 17% weight loss, all kinds of figures you get now. So CagriSema, again meaning cagrilintide and semaglutide combination works in different ways but on the brain and produces weight loss which is greater than either alone. So very interesting future molecule will be CagriSema. Then, how about, we're talking only GLP, we've always ignored GIP. How about we look at GLP plus GIP action? You know that GIP is important for glucose-dependent insulin secretion, it's important for beta cell mass and glucagon secretion, but doesn't have that much effect on gastric emptying, which is primarily the action of GLP-1. So GLP and GIP, if you're doing both, what happens? Can you have one molecule that works through both these pathways? Is it at all possible, even thinkable? Yes, you already are using that molecule. That is available, not available officially. Again, as I said, my patients somehow get everything from anywhere. So if you're able to get that tirzepatide. Tirzepatide is also licensed for use across the world and even more weight loss. Look at the degree of weight loss. Where are you going now? How low are you going? 20%. So you're going even ahead of 17, 18. I don't know whether head-to-head trials will show exactly that much, but there is dramatic. So it's moving even ahead of semaglutide. We don't know because we don't have head-to-head trials, but at least as effective as semaglutide. That you can say confidently. So very interesting because it's using one molecule, two receptors. That's remarkable discoveries by the German and American scientists. That's remarkable. But it doesn't end there. Before I end, I'll give you something even more exciting. So look at this. You can have single receptor agonists that we spoke about at length. I think semaglutide is the perfect single receptor agonist. You will not get a superior, unlikely to get more in the GLP-1 RA single receptor agonist. But you have dual receptor agonist. So you have GLP-1 and GIP, which is tirzepatide. But you also have GLP-1 and glucagon, which has now been successful. Survodutide. The survodutide also produces significant weight loss. Again, 50. I'm not showing that data. Above 15%. That doesn't have GIP. That is GLP-1 and glucagon. As you can see, one molecule doing. Then people thought that the scientists are crazy, and this gentleman shared all his experience at the last endo, and now again of course, that same molecule acting through three receptor pathways. Unbelievable. I mean, look at the science behind it. It's very easy to say SI, industry or drug discovery. But look at the science. You're able to get one molecule to work through three different pathways, and that is retatrutide. And retatrutide actually shows absolutely amazing tri-agonists, as they call them. Insulin sensitivity, weight loss, beta cell function, adipose tissue metabolism, cardiovascular effects, right? There is a lot of structural engineering, I can leave you out of that. But look at the triple receptor action. Single peptide acting through 3 receptors, and there you go. HbA1c change. Dramatic, and look at the weight, body weight change. Placebo, no treatment, placebo, monoagonist, dual agonist, triple agonist. So unbelievable. 25% we're talking about, 24%. Well, what I'm saying is this field is just opening up. Some of these will hit the market, some will not hit the market, but the line is clear now that people will keep trying to develop newer and newer agents. So it is fascinating how this is developing, the whole area, the whole field. 2-3 points here. One is the fact that oral semaglutide I told you, which is being tried in higher doses. That's one very interesting point that's not been put here. Dual and triple receptor I have told you. There are also non-peptide GLP-1 drugs which are being given orally, non-peptides, which are actually effective. So that problem of digestion and using SNAP as being used in some is not there. There's another drug which has dual action, that it reduces fat mass and what is the biggest challenge with weight loss? The muscle mass, and actually preserve muscle. So that's also phase 2 trials are unbelievable. So the whole area, as I said, is completely changed. If that works, something like that works, it's going to be a real game changer, you know. All of these are. So you have peptide agonists, you have peptide multi-agonists that we just spoke about, then you have oral peptide, as I just told you, and then you have oral small molecules. Oral peptide is like oral semaglutide, oral small molecules, as I told you again. Then there are completely new areas of antibodies, cell-based therapy, gene therapy, which is not yet in the clinical domain. So, GLP-1 agonists are all not one. So this is one flower, by the way. What flower is this?
Plumeria.
Absolutely, absolutely. Plumeria, also called champa, also called frangipani. And the classic Indian plumeria is here. The white one. These are all species of plumeria.
Also the yellow one.
Yes, but
White and yellow.
these colored ones are also all Indian, but they are actually originally from Cuba and other parts. So now we have 6-7 colors of champa actually. You always think of champa as white. And so it's quite interesting. Same way, in your GLP-1 arrays, you have so many, a full bouquet, from the same group, but showing different colors. Thank you very much.
Sir, please come.
May I invite you? Just join me. Thank you so much for a masterly presentation as usual, sir. And it's very evident to all of us that as a teacher, what Dr. Mittal sir brings across at the table. The last slide also summarized one of, if I may say so, Dr. Mittal sir, one of his pet passions is a very avid photographer. And we do keep on seeing all his walks, etc. So thank you very much for a brilliant presentation as usual. Sir, before I get it over for discussion, should we now consider that the initial, doubts about thyroid cancer, etc., they are put at rest, or is there something, I mean, if you are not taking into consideration the family history, etc., but otherwise speaking, because people do search of Google and there are all kinds of questions which are there.
So I actually rushed to the slides in adverse events because I thought there's shortage of time and the question will be there. So I'm glad you asked it right away. So the two major things that we have to look at. The GI side effects are obvious and they're evident if they're there. One is you must ask history of pancreatitis. So if someone has history of pancreatitis, you stay away from these drugs. As such, pancreatitis is quite uncommon. In fact, you'll be surprised it's probably common with the glutens that you use. But still, it's not common, but you need to be aware. You need to, someone complains of abdominal pain, you need to check the amylase lipase. The second is about thyroid cancer, and I think that's very important. The evidence is very conflicting, it's not convincing. Recent data suggests there's nothing, but medullary thyroid CA, since in animals has been reported, it's a rare kind of thyroid cancer. We see thyroid cancer every day, medullary thyroid cancer once in a few months. We see papillary, follicular, the usual. So medullary thyroid cancer is there, which means that there is a family history of thyroid cancer. That's a familial cancer. Then don't prescribe it. My gut feeling is that even that will be removed, but because new data are not suggesting that. But as practicing clinicians, we ought to be cautious. So I think it's good. Now what we do in clinical practice, and this is not a recommendation, this is not any guideline, this is what I do, and they're sharing with you because there is no written recommendation. I do measure a calcitonin in everybody that I prescribe. Who knows, 1 out of 10,000 will turn out to have underlying medullary thyroid cancer. And calcitonin baseline. And for good measure, when you're giving a sample, amylase lipase also. Although that can be misleading also, they often have that. But still, to keep ourselves, new drugs, keep yourself safe and the patient safe, it's good to measure these. So, maybe once in 3 or 6 months I repeat the calcitonin. This is particularly true with the injectable, more potent one. I'm not doing it so much for
So also the signals for the cancer part of it must be much higher dosages which we use, not the one that is prescribed.
Absolutely. So I think the medullary cancer story is very unlikely to have any direct clinical impact, but you never know these things. So I read a case report from Mayo Clinic where as part of the study, they were just testing the calcitonin, just as part of because the patient was in a trial or whatever. And they found a rising calcitonin. And they picked up a medullary thyroid CA like that. So, that kind of thing makes one alert that maybe it's not going to hurt, cost doesn't matter to the people who are paying so much for it. Why not do a 3 or 6 monthly calcitonin, that's all. But I agree with you that the risk is exaggerated.
So, since all the newer generation drugs will be acting, primarily taken up from the brain action point of view, are there any concerns that we look at from that perspective?
So yes, people are now, it's part of the trials to look at depression and all that. Whether when you're benefiting Alzheimer's and maybe even Parkinson's, you may be harming some other things along the way. At the moment it looks clean. Some people did report some mild depression and all, but I don't think there's any randomized trial.
Thank you so much.
So wonderful presentation as always. We kept us spellbound. So majority of our patients are majority of our patients are already on some sort of secreted box, whether it's sulfonylureas or it is actually insulin. Now I would like to ask you, sir, if my patient is already on sulfonylureas or on concurrent insulin therapy, will the weight loss be that much less if we were to use oral semaglutide versus in a patient where we are using oral semaglutide solo, maybe probably with metformin?
Yes, absolutely right. That's what I was saying. There is a little difference in the weight loss that you can induce by the use of semaglutide, oral or injectable. There will be a slightly lower or less weight loss. People with diabetes, one of the main reasons for that is the fact of commutative medication. Sulfonylurea, insulin or bivalent. So all of them will fight that. So maybe if you were getting, as I said, we talked about oral, let's say you're getting 5 kg weight loss and non-diabetic 6 kg, you may get 3 or 4. There will be a slight difference.
So you said that in your patients, in the 351 patients that you presented, there was an HbA1c reduction down to 6.6 actually.
Yes.
Sir, did you decrease the dose of sulfonylureas that they were getting?
All those slides there was too much to discuss. Yes.
Just to explain.
In many patients, the dose of sulfonylureas as well as the dose of insulin, if they were on insulin, is reduced. So patients are keen to reduce all chemical. We say that the first drug that should go is sulfonylurea. To reduce sulfonylurea. Second will be insulin. But a combination of basal insulin and these GLP-1 RAs works really well. And I foresee a future when you have a weekly insulin next year, maybe, and a weekly GLP-1 RA. Just look at how the thing will change completely. And you already have combination.
All it is basically more stricter monitoring in the first 10 15 days, 2 or 3 weeks when you initiate it.
Yes. So whenever you see complex therapies and some more monitoring is required, with the greater use of Libraze and all that will become much easier.
Sir, can I again request to have some decency, please, at the end. No. I'm just saying to everyone because we are having some important discussion. Dr. Rajneesh, can I request you to please come here, sir? Please come here, sir. Let's welcome Dr. Rajneesh Murunker, sir. I think you better be here, sir. Can we hear it for Dr. Rajneesh?
So if actually a cardiac surgeon
Yes, sir.
heard this talk, then I'm truly flattered.
Yes, sir. मैंने दो चीजें कही। मैंने सर जब आप पहली बार आए थे ना फॉरम में तो मैंने आपके लिए दो लाइन्स कही थी और वो जो कही गई न मुझसे वो जमाना कह रहा है, जो कही गई न मुझसे वो जमाना कह रहा है, मेरी बात अफसाना बन गई है चलते चलते। Sir, you mentioned about MSL, and we have heard previously that nothing works unless and until you lose weight. We have heard about many molecules which are benefiting to that end. We have heard of metformin working in NAFLD. We have heard of a molecule called pioglitazone working very well in NAFLD. We have heard of a molecule which has been approved by FDA, saroglitazone, an Indian molecule which has been approved for fibrosis also in NAFLD. Then when you taught us SGLT2 inhibitors, there was a study called the ELIP study, which even proved histologically that there were benefits, and now we have this molecule. Of all these molecules, how to have a rational combination?
So I think this is a very important question, but actually largely unanswered. Unanswered because the impact on fibrosis of any of these to a significant degree is still, so it's not solid yet. So clearly there's improvement in inflammation. No doubt, ballooning scores, all those come down. There's an improvement in liver enzymes. There's reduction in liver fat using whatever technique you want to use. But how much of that translates into fibrosis reversal? That is still open to question. Therefore, FDA has actually suggested you can use but not approved any one of them as a drug for MSLD, except resmetirom, which is a thyroid receptor agonist, and it's all very complicated. I don't want to go there. It's not available. It's frankly expensive. It's not. But so they are not approved, but they are good choices for those patients.
Sir, I have called Dr. Rajneesh for a very vested interest here. I wanted to know his perspective. He must be having a lot of patients where he operates, he does bypass, and patients refuse to lose weight. I wanted to know his perspective. How is he handling them, and is he using oral semaglutide?
So I would say that we have started using oral semaglutide very recently, and we have really found that few of our patients have reported they have lost significant weight, and especially I would say non-diabetic also have lost weight. So I just wanted to ask, sir, should we be recommending non-diabetics as well?
Good question. Oral semaglutide, because of the extent of weight loss being only 4 or 5 kg average, is not approved for use in non-diabetics. But it is an off-label use and we are using it. So, but if you look at the approval by Indian authorities, It is approved for diabetes. Sorry?
Off-label.
All, I mean, you use metformin for PCO, whereas no one's really going to question that. But it's not approved.
The other thing I just wanted to ability of oral semaglutide is only 1%. 99% get wasted. So, I mean, how is this possible?
So,
Only 1%. I mean, are there any ways of making it more bioavailable?
I think that's a great question because it's very important. The same thing happened with alendronate. So the thing that happens is that peptides get broken down in the gut. Peptides don't get absorbed. Oral PTH you don't have, oral LH, oral FH you don't have, oral insulin you don't have. So this is remarkable because there's this technology at it's called SNAP technology, which at least allows its absorption. So what has happened? That is why all this drama of having it in the morning, empty stomach, with half a glass of water and 45 minutes nothing. But that 1% seems to be good enough to pick up that. But I suspect that, rather I expect that much higher doses will be used orally in the future.
So the last question, sir. Can we recommend for our diabetic patients oral semaglutide along with the oral other?
So you certainly can. You should be doing that with the due precautions. And when you put somebody on oral semaglutide, don't forget to remove the gliptin. It has happened with me. You know, in the busy OPD, I told my, fresh DMP, isko add kar do. It is a good candidate for dialysis. Add hi kiya, I forgot to say, remove the urgent or whatever else. So although it's not criminal, it's not risky, but it's an unexplored area, it doesn't make any sense. So we have to reduce the
Sir, I have one question. Sir, just my last question and I'm coming to you. Sir, you mentioned about hypoglycemia versus the GLP-1 analogs. And you mentioned that as such, they do not have the potential for a hypoglycemic potential. And as you were exploring your journey for medications, at the same time, they don't cause hypoglycemia. This is a wonderful molecule. But sir, there is a downside to it. And the downside is that when we are using oral GLP-1 analogs or even injectable GLP-1 analogs, at times they can cause very severe appetite loss. And patient actually can get into hypoglycemia because then he starts missing meals.
So not only that, I mean, that is exactly what happens when some patients feel very fatigued, some patients feel very low, they feel very down because it totally can't be. That happens with some patients. So we have to, as I said, discontinuation rates are up to 20%.
Sir, Dr. Podar has a question and he has threatened me that if I don't allow him, he will forget the question.
So, Dr. Mittal, because it causes up to 15% weight loss, particularly when the dual receptor agonist will be available. So, what will be the role of bariatric surgery? Because,
So we've had meetings with our bariatric surgeons also about this, and actually bariatric surgery will remain, but the borderline sort of cases which are going to bariatric surgery will probably not require.
So that cases will decrease, definitely decrease.
It will be left for those with more severe history. The other thing that our bariatric surgeons are happy about is they want to use it both bariatric surgery. Because if you're 150 kilograms, you come to 120 or 110, you still want to use more. And some of them regain weight. So they're actually thinking of trying it in people who undergone bariatric surgery but not.
Just one more question. In medullary thyroid carcinoma, you said calcitonin became monitor. CEA is also there in medullary thyroid carcinoma blood. So what about that? CEA
It's not specific. Not specific.
various blood carcinoma also. Yes, thank you.
Dr. S.L. Kanpur sir has a question.
Sir, what is the say about the GIP and GLP receptor agonist, tirzepatide?
Yes.
What is its role and is being used in India?
So both
Because it decreases HbA1c from 1.6 to 2.1%.
So tirzepatide is not officially available in India, but I have heard that it is going to be available next year, like the injectable semaglutide. So injectable semaglutide will come as Ozempic and Wegovy, and tirzepatide will also come. So I think it's a good molecule. I think it's a very good molecule.
What about the exenatide?
Exenatide?
It is given with glargine also.
Exenatide is what we started our journey with. That is
Reducing the postprandial, you see.
So exenatide is the first molecule from the series, and we use a lot of it. But the GI side effects are a lot, and the benefits are not so many. These are far superior.
So, what Dr. Udasa asked, when the parallel with Dr. Rajni sir, many of the plastic lesions or angioplastic other than mine.
Dr. Mangla sir has a question.
Yes.
Semaglutide, lifelong drug. Sorry, once you lose weight.
That is the hardest question. So, unfortunately, endocrinology is lifelong. So, that's why these guys, if their patient comes back, they are very unhappy. In our case, if patient doesn't come back, they are very happy. So that's complete 180 degrees opposite approach. So we don't know. But conceptually, it is lifelong.
Somebody who has lost weight.
Yes.
So mic चलने रहा है.
So we had a lot of discussion on this topic
नहीं चल रहा है.
in Boston and meeting.
It is not working here.
Because no one has data. So people are sharing what they do. Anyway, what I am doing is the weight loss stops and patient is fine, everything is good. Then I de-escalate the medication. 7, then see. Now I don't know where I'm going to reach, but this is what we are doing. Some people say, no, we just stop it and see what happens. Every time you do cold turkey, like you just stop it completely. Then weight does come back.
So the reason why you had started was the other mechanisms were not allowing the patient to lose weight. So you had initiated it. So obviously,
इस वाले के नहीं है.
What percentage of weight loss is lean body weight?
Yes. So other very, very important question is with about what proportion is muscle loss, right? So, okay, different studies have shown different data. It depends a lot on the protein intake and the muscle physical activity of the individual. But having said that, approximately 20% is the, so if you lose 10 kilograms, that's 2 kg of muscle mass. That's a lot. And Indians have low muscle mass anyway. Now, I have just completed a review on this. I hope it gets accepted. You sent it out. So, when we're trying to figure out what is the muscle action, actually there is nothing adverse in the muscle by the drug at all. And the thing is that it is a part of weight loss. Any way that you lose weight, about 20% is muscle.
Even with diabetic.
Very active. Even more than 20%. So it's not molecule specific thing. And in fact, there is no adverse action of GLP-1 so far on the muscle person.
Same will be shot with the SGLT2s.
SGLT2 also, there is no proof that they actually cause muscle loss. We see wasting and all that, we are worried. It's part of weight loss. And some of it is dehydration.
So my question would be, would gastric upset in our Indian patients be linked to the genetic concern or the oral snack contributing versus the injectable semaglutide to some extent versus in the real world evidence?
You mean real world evidence is oral will have more gastric effects?
At least that's as per my
So not true. That's the thing. They didn't find that. Let's see when we use it more. We're using injectable in selected patients now. But no, that's not true because it is not correct. It's not a local action. It depends on the blood level. Very roughly 14 milligram barely reaches the level equivalent to 1 milligram once a week.
Dr. Kiran has a question, sir.
Sir, very simple question. Can we prescribe orlistat along with this semaglutide if the patient is very obese?
Yes, you can try. There's no problem. There is no data to suggest that there will be any interaction. It can act differently.
So Dr. Sunil Kapoor of the Bill Gates Foundation fame.
Do we
fibrosis is a pretty irreversible state. Pre-fibrosis should be reversed. People claiming that fibrosis reverses is
So the liver, that is not true. I fought exactly what, that's a basic understanding. With liver, at least at F3, it is significantly reversible. So liver tissue has that capability.
So Dr. Sunil Sahgal sir, our pediatric representative, he has a question.
Yes.
Sir, if somebody is on semaglutide 14 milligram, he has lost about 7 kg, and in the last 6 months he has stopped losing weight after that. Does he continue with semaglutide or oral semaglutide? Does he stop it after that?
If the patient is quite comfortable and all, you can continue. If the patient is keen to go off or you want, then you can try bringing it down to 7. I would not recommend stopping it suddenly. Okay. What I have seen in the experience that I have gained over the last couple of years is that those who are really good with their lifestyle, those who tailor their lifestyle for weight reduction, weight management, they're managing much better than those who are totally dependent on the medication. So that is a big differentiator.
If there is no weight loss for 6 months,
yes,
what benefit will this drug give to that person if he continues to take 7 milligram or 14 milligram?
So the only thing I can say is that the cardiac benefits and the renal and liver benefits might well continue to happen. So if there is a risk for that, I would continue it. Otherwise also I would tend to continue it because if you just stop it, there is a problem is that the weight might come back and not the benefit.
So let's continue with the reduced dose of 7 milligram rather than 14 milligram.
That is not a guideline, that is what I do.
That's your...
So combination of GLP-1 iron insulin, yes, very much.
Dr. Mittal sir, some last minute Viva sir, you are due for your D Viva sir.
Rapid fire.
D Viva.
No D Viva. Very simple question, Dr. Mittal. You dwelt at length about how the recent, GLP-1 agonists, the dual agonists, the triple agonists as well. To start with, let me talk about the revision in type 2 diabetes. You talked about the direct study. What about the direct extension study, the look ahead study, and the new dawn study? See, these were landmark trials and studies, and revisions achieved not at 1 year, not at 2 years, not at 5 years, even at 12 years. Talk us through these landmark trials.
Yes, I think that's the key point. The point there is that if you're able to achieve remission, you can hold it for pretty long. If you continue on the maintenance, maintenance भी छोड़ दिया तब तो नहीं है. But if you're able to continue maintenance, the results are really good. I hit all those slides. They're all there in the same presentation. So there was too much to
So we have some side effects, really bad side effects with GLP-1 agonists, and besides, we have weight loss, but talking about muscle loss, at least 10% of is lost here with GLP-1 agonists, and not only that, we have vitamin deficiencies. There's a lot of promotion. Dr. Chauhan, lot of promotion at the back once again.
Silence.
Let me proceed, sir. Okay. So, at least 10% muscle loss. And you talked about fatigue, and you said you don't know the cause. I think it's because of vitamin deficiencies, it's because of bone loss, and of course the GI side effects. So these are probably, which cause fatigue, and this seems to be the possible explanation for causing fatigue. So muscle loss, bone loss, vitamin deficiencies, all those.
So vitamin deficiencies are not so common because unless someone is completely stopped eating,
you're not eating, sir?
feel fatigue.
Yeah.
Then of course. Normally these patients, all diabetics and are on some supplements anyway. Bone loss does not happen. Bone loss with GLP-1 is actually good for the bone to some extent. Bone loss with GLP-1 is not good. Little bit with SGLT2 some beneficial, but not for GLP-1.
Let me proceed further. GLP-1 agonists have many pleiotropic benefits. Erectile dysfunction improves. Then the Journal of Ophthalmology talked a little about the focus study. Which said probably diabetic retinopathy may become better, especially in patients who have advanced retinopathies, may become better with that. Of course, the focus trial is still ongoing. And talking also about, we talked about the EVOKE and the EVOKE Plus trials, and also the recent ongoing trial, the liraglutide. Remarkable effects seen in cognition, Alzheimer's, dementia. So these are neuroprotective drugs because they cross the blood-brain barrier. And the effect is on the entire brain, including the base and the hypothalamus, so where the memory center also is located. So these are some wonderful pleiotropic effects. And my last thing would be our surgeon friend, Dr. Padar is here. The Journal of Sepsis said GLP-1 agonists improve, survival, have mortality benefits if you have septicemia, if you have sepsis. So you do not have to discontinue these drugs as you have to discontinue drugs in acute infections with SGLT2 inhibitors. Talking about the infections, and not to forget the SELECT trial which talked about, which included the COVID-19 patients as well, and they said patients who were on GLP-1 agonists fared much better, with COVID-19 mortalities.
I think many of these all of them are very interesting. Many of these are in the observational stage, so we'll have to see. But I totally agree that the most exciting area is the neuro area, the neurological area, which I think will be a huge breakthrough.
Yeah, my last question. You talked about, we don't have drugs for preserved infection, heart failure preservation. So we have SGLT2 inhibitors as well, across the spectrum of the heart failure. And Jack recently said that probably this is even more better than SGLT2 inhibitors in preserved infection, because they are acting at the preclinical stage. They are acting on the endothelium instead of the cardiomyocytes. Thank you, sir.
GLP-1 agonist may have beneficial effects in surgery due to anti-inflammatory effects. That's some study.
So one last comment to surgeons, that there are some reports that if someone continues GLP-1 RA when they are undergoing anesthesia, for example,
aspiration,
because of gastric spaces, there is a higher chance of aspiration. So in general, before I just
Dr. Dalas, Dr. Sen has very secretly requested that he is feeling extremely hungry and almost going to hypo. So last two questions, if you don't mind.
आधे क्वेश्चन करके 4 पूछेंगे।
कहने को बहुत कुछ था, अगर हम कहने पे आते, अपनी तो आदत है कि हम कुछ नहीं कहते। एक छोटा सा सवाल ये है, the triple agonist is very good for weight loss. Is it as good for diabetic control also? Because we are including glucagon itself, which may not be good for diabetic control. What's your comment?
Yes, but it can be shown to be very good for that. I will show that.
Sir, Digitalis came for gynae use. Digitalis, the Dioxin started its use as some use in the gynae use, and then it became a heart medicine. Now medicines came for diabetic use. They are coming used for heart and for weight, and hardly any use or may not be used for diabetes in future. Sir, my
question is C-peptide to be tested before we start such medicines? Will it be useful to know whether insulin is there working, is the insulinic? Because we are not using for insulinic. We are not using type 1, which is insulinic. So is it for use? But patients having no insulin, no C-peptide.
Probably we have some use there also. Because of the peripheral and the central action. Even if you exclude the pancreatic action, there is significant benefit in diabetes. In fact, in type 1 also, in type 1 diabetics, you are putting on excessive weight and requirement is going up. We are also using GLP-1.
My last one-fourth questions, not questions. Mitochondrial decouplers are coming very popularly for weight loss. Very recently they are in pipeline. So I think they will also be adding to our health. About oral contraceptive use. Oral contraceptive use, I read somewhere that they should be stopped for some time when you are starting such medicine, with medicines orally, and also when you are upgrading, use of oral contraceptives should be withheld for starting this oral cinema and when you are up-titrating also.
I'm actually not aware of that. I'm totally aware. Thank you.
Just for why SGLT2 inhibitors are stopped before surgery? Why?
SGLT inhibitors did not necessarily stop before surgery. The only reason why initially people were reluctant to use them was because catheterization is very common. A little bit more risk of UTI and all these, so that's why. But they are not now necessarily stopped.
Only for urinary intervention maybe.
I think the most reasonable person in the entire audience will be Dr. Sen Gupta, because he himself has to take data and he will summarize this exactly in 30 seconds.
So, dear friends, I think it's been a wonderful, masterly presentation by Dr. Mittal sir, and we are going home all the more informed, and he has answered through a vast multitude of questions. I think he will be looking at from the last question's perspective that if GLP-1 receptor agonist increases the potential, I think that will be something good for the future. And thank you everyone for attending this evening. Good night.